Welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. In a world dictated by the unexpected and risk-taking, the changing nature of the threats we face leave us with little time to react. I'm joined today by someone who focuses on the uncertainty of the modern world, the author of best-selling books, The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, risk analyst Nassim Taleb is my guest today.
Economic crisis, civil protests, the rise and fall of regimes, and the spread of terror. Even the globe's leading powers cannot handle the pressure. How do you cope with the aftermath of the most shocking events? And how do you sustain stability in a volatile, fragile world?
Professor Nassim Nicholas Taleb, it's a real pleasure to have you on our show today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, you've said that there is no way to control economic cycles and prevent crashes, right? So basically, I quote, we need what we need is the citizens to become robust to them and to be immune to their impact. Now, how does that happen in the real world? How can you make yourself immune?
So let me, before that, let's talk about the error of trying to control economic cycles. I mean, it's sort of like a doctor trying to micromanage your body temperature. If you take anything organic and you try to control its variability, you will end up with less variability than you started with, but the system will become more fragile. So take a forest. If you micromanage the forest to try to extinguish every single fire, okay, at its inception, you end up with a lot of flammable material. And so it means you have a forest with no cycles. And the first fire you can't control will destroy your forest. The same thing happened with the economy. They wanted to micromanage the cycle. So if you have no volatility for a long time, you never have a dip in economic activity, what happens to the businesses that are around is that you're going to have a lot of fragile businesses. There's sort of a lot of flammable material, so to speak. And these businesses will have more and more of them, okay? And the first crisis that you can no longer control, all right, will be vastly deeper than otherwise. So a little bit of variability in the economy is very healthy.
So basically, not ever trying to control or prevent a crisis is what makes you immune to the next one?
Exactly. So what you want to do is maybe manage the big crisis, but the small ones, let things take care of themselves. Okay?
Do you have like a precise example of like when that happened in a country that you think?
Okay, I mean, let's talk. We can talk about the United States. There's a fellow called Alan Greenspan, right, who discovered the business cycle and discovered monetary policy on the job. He came to the Fed in 1980, around 87, right before the crisis, the crash, and he realized that hey, you can give, you can lower rates and inject funds in the system to prevent crisis from happening. In 1987, it was very useful, and it allowed us to recover from that big dip in the stock market. It was the biggest crash ever, in one-day crash. We came back, and it was good. So he thought that he had the magic formula, you see? And had you given him nature, he would have eliminated the season. So he tried to do the same thing. Every time at the first sign of a problem, he would lower rates. So what happened is that he lowered rates so much that now we have rates at zero. We can no longer lower them. So we lost the effectiveness of that monetary policy. So, and not only that, but we can't bring rates back to their original level because the whole thing may collapse. So everybody is extremely scared of raising back rates. So here you see what happened. 91, 87, 91, 2000, again 2002. And then again, and I think a couple of times, micro times after that. So he tried to manage the cycle. The way you should do things is be there for the big problems and let the small things take care of themselves.
I just came out of your lecture and you said something very interesting that if you had a choice, you'd rather invest in Russia than Saudi Arabia. Now, for many, that sounds odd. Can you explain why?
Okay, let me explain that idea of the such thing. I've always hesitate about talking about investments I don't have. So typically, I only talk about.
But you're a philosopher, so you can.
No, but still, I can't. No, it's just my skin in the game ethics forced me to have something at risk, and I currently have nothing at risk in Russia, but thank God, nothing at risk in Saudi Arabia. But let me explain the point. If you look in history, you realize that companies, countries, entities, let's call it an entity, that has sustained more trauma in its, or in its recent history, like a stock that bounces back, right, goes through hell and comes back, generally can have given us information about how much heat they can sustain. So on that account, the fact that Russia went through the problems of the early 1990s shows that the system can handle a huge drop in economic activity, a huge rise in unemployment, severe disruptions in the institutional structure without falling apart. That we have that, okay? We have that evidence. Russia has things that Saudi Arabia doesn't have, okay? Iran, for example, compare the two, Saudi Arabia. These countries can take a lot of volatility. they can take, so I'm much more comfortable in a place like that because I know the social order is not likely to collapse no matter what happens. Saudi Arabia, I don't know if Saudi Arabia can go through a dip in oil prices. I don't know what would be the catalyst, but I know that eventually something's going to collapse.
But then there's another problem. See, Russia, like you've pointed out, has gone out through so many chaoses and crises and volatile situations that we really build our anti-fragility gene, and we have a very high ability to adapt.
I think I'd warn on one thing. I don't think Russia is anti-fragile yet. I think it is robust.
Let's talk about that, because I feel like we know how to adapt, but then this sort of high ability to adapt has in some way turned into,
complacency.
Should I say indifference?
That's
instead
good.
of tackling the problem, you're just, accepting it, basically. How do you overcome that?
It is a huge amount, it is a problem of Russia, okay? If you take countries like what you see in Southeast Asia, places like that, there's countries that went through shocks and they bounced back with a vengeance. They came back with a vengeance. China, we know that China will have a problem. It will be some kind of economic problem that will lead to some kind of restructuring, maybe organic restructuring, and China will bounce back like it's going to impress everyone again. So because China. Now Russia, you have two or three things hindering Russia. Okay, and then let's talk about it. The first one is, when people talk about Russia, I don't care about geopolitics. Geopolitics has absolutely nothing to do with anything, all right? What matters, two things. The first one, you need a huge pool of middle-sized companies, all right? You can retain or structure, you need a lot of small companies, all right? The middle market that really made Germany, okay? And the second one, you need to find ways to stop your brain drain. My field, probability theory, my field, I started as a trader, I'm ended up more and more in probability. Out of 20 top names, maybe 14 are Russian. This is mind-boggling. No field is dominated by any nationality to that extent. So there's no Germans. You don't see that many Germans. You see a few French persons. You don't see that many people from the UK. Russians. So where is that talent? Well, that talent is being exported, right? So that is the problem of Russia. So Russia needs to deal with brain drain and with middle size. Now, maybe they're connected. Maybe you can find ways to encourage people to stay, but I don't know, giving them, some emotional support, some whatever. Okay, I don't know how these things are done, but I'm saying that this is a problem of Russia.
We keep bringing up China. Is it a worrying sign that there are some real problems in Chinese economy, and what would that mean for the world economy?
What you're saying is journalistic, and let me explain why. All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a hard time. You can frame things the way you want. I can look at the story of China. I don't have the exact numbers, and I can tell you, the past 10, 15 years rose by that amount. Or I can look at the losses of the past 2 weeks, right? So it depends how you frame China. You got to see where they started, where they are now. If you frame it journalistically, people are going to take the most sensational, all right? So which is why journalists don't invest, and investors don't don't work for newspapers, so let's frame it properly. I say zero problem in China so far. Okay, I'm much more worried about things that have been fueled by low interest rate like the United States, where we created inequality with economic policy that lowered rates monstrously. Okay, so assets went up disproportionately. Stock market, real estate in luxury areas, but not, for the regular American family. This I'm more worried about, and I'm worried that we may have a more severe effect from a drop in asset prices in the U.S. Plus, we have to realize that the Chinese stock market isn't huge. And the other thing for the rest of the world is that the Chinese don't buy stuff from the rest of the world. See, they sell stuff to the rest of the world. Yeah, I mean, so I think I computed that it's less, that the entire U.S. export to China, less than what's sold at Walmart, which is, I mean, it's still substantial, but it's nothing. It's a few points of GDP or a small 1 point of GDP or 2 points, something, from I recall. So it's more of a psychological thing than a practical thing. On the other hand, slowdown in the U.S. will affect the Chinese big time. So you got to worry about the U.S., not about China, if you're concerned about China.
Nassim, we're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll continue talking to Nassim Nicholas Taleb, American economist, essayist, author, professor, philosopher, and just a great man. Stay with us.
I'm Tom Harpin, and I'll give you what the mainstream media can't, the big picture. We'll go deeper, investigate, and debate, all so you can get the big picture.
It's 1/3 of the coastal marshes in the country. It's 1/4 of its seafood. It's a generator of income without equal in America.
What's more, in the 1950s, the oil industry came to Louisiana. Now, Louisiana produces 1/3 of the nation's oil and gas, but the government still wants more.
They are getting millions of dollars a day, taking royalties from lands that are owned by private landowners because the land has gone below.
Flooding the land is the consequence of drilling. It didn't stop the oil companies. Now they drill in the sea.
I'm 55 years old and I've never seen it before. Before BP, we never seen it.
So what will be left of Louisiana for the next generation?
The main thing that people need to understand looking at this is a marsh. This should be a beautiful, green, vibrant marsh. It's all dead.
And we're back. We're talking to Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Nassim, so I want to talk to you about debt. You said that debt actually causes wars. It's never good. It's never accumulated in moderation. Well, today the world is suffering from vast debt. If you compare it to 2007, it has accumulated $57 trillion. Countries like China and America that we've been talking about, how are they going to deal with their debt? Austerity, more borrowing, maybe defaulting? What's your take on that?
That's what worries me. Governments engage in debt, all right? Why? Not because governments ever, say, okay, the economic policy means we have to borrow. The point is that the French government, for example, I think when I wrote The Black Swan, I looked at 53 out of 54 years. They've underestimated their deficit, okay? And that's what that comes in. So it's something that civil servants who underestimate uncertainty have to face, and then they raise what they can't raise via taxation, they raise via debt, and try to inflate things out of the system. So this is why debt is not very good. Now, you read the economics textbook, they give you some models in which debt works, but then if you put the meta model on top, much more rigorous analytically and takes into account model error, then you realize that debt compounds all these problems that you have, okay? Beyond a certain small amount to help families. So this is why debt is not a good thing. Now, where are we now today? The crisis was a debt crisis. We had a huge rise in debt, again, for businesses that do not necessarily need the debt. That's a speculative thing, and kept going. And after the crisis, we had a lot of borrowers who were not, shouldn't be borrowing, who paid the price? The taxpayers. How? Because private debt was transformed via magic wands into public debt. That's not good, you see? So
what now?
Okay, well, now that we have a lot of debt, we're facing a situation where shrinking the debt would cause a huge contraction of economic activity, you see? That is where we're facing quality. So my point is that we should educate people. Undo all this bad, education, the messaging, educate people that debt is not good. That, you give them the example that Microsoft was not built on debt. Apple is not built on debt. Name a company that was successful. Let's look at the debt history, and name a country that was successful. Let's look at the phase when they got successful in debt history, and then you can realize that debt is something that economists like to promote simply because it's good for civil servants. That's it. Mm-hmm. So educate people to avoid debt.
You have a recurring theme of forecast and how it's silly to actually base your predictions analyzing history or economics because it gives you an illusion, a false illusion of knowing the world that you live in today. Yeah. So if you can't really analyze from your own mistakes, right? You can't analyze from history. Is there really no effective way to measure risks, to predict the outcome ever?
Of course, that's my lecture, that's my last book, that's everything I've done. That I keep explaining that this I know is very fragile. I know what would break it, but I cannot forecast with precision when it will break. But I know this is breakable, much more breakable than a styrofoam cup, you see? So we know that, we know which companies are likely to go bust, so we can measure fragility. We cannot predict the event, but we can say so a company with debt, for example, can't sustain the stressor that a company without debt would be able to go through, you see? And things like that. And the system with a decentralized system can withstand shocks a lot better than a non-centralized system, organic, self-organized system. And that's complexity theory. Let's take the restaurant business, which is the ideal business. Have you ever had a restaurant crisis in the West?
Nowhere,
no, okay.
Not only in the West, nowhere.
So the government doesn't have to bail out restaurants. Why? Because it seems disorganized, but it's very well organized, a self-organized system in which people make their mistakes and go bust early. You see? And then so they can start again. And the consumers have the optimal price almost all the time, except if you want to pay up. And you don't have bailouts. You don't have a generalized restaurant crisis, not like the banking crisis or not like the car automaker crisis. You don't have government bailout. So this system is not based on prediction. The system operates in a way that is organically very stable. Nature doesn't predict. What nature does is focus on robustness. And the metaphor I've used in the past is that nature or God, depends on your theology, gave us 2 kidneys. So you don't need 2 kidneys. You can operate perfectly on 1, except that the second kidney allows us to not have to predict the environment. So you can go through. So you don't have to know exactly, what will cause you to lose a kidney. You see. So it's the same thing with corporations. If you have a buffer, some layers of redundancy, you can withstand economic shocks, and you don't have to hire some economist to get it. And then let's look at the track record of people in prediction. 0. But let's go back to the point of forecast. Let me summarize. Forecasting is the province of the charlatan. Unless it's done properly. You can say rigorously that this is fragile, this bridge is going to collapse, instead of predicting what and where and who's going to, you build a better bridge, right? And forecasting makes you fragile because those who forecast develop overconfidence about the future and start engaging in debt and other risky activities. And look at the track record of the forecasters, pitiful.
Can I ask you something? To what extent should we be accepting our fate?
So I've spoken to a lot of people, a lot of people, a lot of successful people, a lot of unsuccessful people. And it seems to me that those who have the best control of their environment are those who think that the environment is more random. And those who think that it's all, we can get the cause and effects, we can see everything, there's no opacity, are the sucker, and these people are the ones who fail. So it's very strange that those who succeed are those who control randomness the best by accepting that it's there and working the best around the corners of things that are predictable and that other people are not predicting. And you see, because there's some pockets of predictability. You see, I know that something very fragile is going to collapse. If you accept unpredictability, then you engage in tinkering. Think that when you're wrong costs you very little, and when you're right, make you a lot. So it's not your strategy. It's not what happened to the world that counts. It's the strategy of minimizing shocks from random events and opening up for the good randomness.
What about the black swans? I mean, we live in a very fast-paced world, and it's very unpredictable. Do you feel like because everything's happening so fast, there are going to be more and more black swans to come? Are we to expect more of them?
I think I've always... The only thing that's happening today with our world is that you have more connectedness. Therefore, things can happen much faster than before. I would worry about one central thing, because it's not just money. It's viruses or bacteria or germs. Okay.
Like Ebola?
For example, I was very depressed when I saw the reaction to Ebola.
Because that's more dangerous than spread of ISIS, in your opinion?
That's much more dangerous than cancer, than anything, because it multiplies and can multiply very quickly. The world has had one plague, and today things seem under control. ISIS is definitely not the danger. They're good on YouTube, but it's not. The millennia, we were talking about the indigo generation, the millennials seem to care about more what happens on YouTube than reality, right? And hopefully that would change through selection. But the worry is not Al-Qaeda, it's not these guys. These guys are less dangerous than, it's a fraction of suicide in the West. It's a fraction of people killed falling from ladders, all right? Nothing. The point that you have to worry about is the fact that the plague was traveling at a speed of, I think, 30 miles a day, maximum speed. Today, what is it?
We don't know. Where is Ebola now?
Tomorrow I'm going back to New York, and I'm going to be traveling, several thousand miles in 10 hours. So you realize. And it's multiplicated. It will multiply much faster. So Ebola was not the problem. It's something similar. But what depressed me was the reaction by people, the complacency. They didn't realize that something like that needs to be systematically stopped at the source. You see, you don't wait for things to multiply. Luckily, there's countries like Singapore, places like that understand the point. But we need a little more active management of, we need to sit down and say, okay, what if we have another Ebola? How do we manage it? The journalists were using what I call naive empiricism, of comparing it to other bigger diseases. Yeah, but cancer, the rate of cancer is not doubling every week. You don't have to worry. It's not an epidemic. It's just something that we have. Diabetes kills a lot of people, but the odds of that number changing hugely from one year to the next is very small. It's what I call mediocristan, things that are locally predictable. But Ebola has much higher degree of unpredictability, because it's what I call the extremistan, the fat-tailed. So, and this is a black swan domain. Because the black swan territory, you have to take it seriously. So, not Ebola, other things like that. We're not equipped today. If tomorrow there's an emergency like Ebola, all right, we have a very well-organized system to prevent terrorists from traveling, because everybody blocks them, everybody cooperates and stuff like that. But we don't have the same level of cooperation to immediately stop the spread of something of the sort. You see, and that worries me because one thing, antibiotic resistance is serious.
Do you have power in you for one more question?
Yeah, of course.
I know that Black Swan has been huge, so a lot of world leaders love your book. If politicians were to embrace your thinking, what would that mean for politics?
I don't pay attention to politicians. To be honest, I mean, I'm blunt about it because I don't pay attention to it. I think politicians play a smaller role than you think. Politicians are more like actors. They put on a job, and then they respond via polling, the environment, and stuff like that. So I don't pay attention to the politician. I pay attention to the structure of political life. Unfortunately, has not been very adapted to the nature of the complex system that we have. So I don't pay attention to politicians at all. For me, they don't exist. It's a parallel world. I don't want to be part of it. I don't go to Davos. I don't do this. I don't do that. I don't advise anyone. I don't want to be advised by anyone. It's a separate world for me.
All right. Well, hopefully they will listen more to you because I still live in a world where politics decide a lot of things. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you for
it's been a
inviting
pleasure.
me.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you. Thanks.